Well, never mind all that stuff because COVID also taught Sunny Hostin how to get her groceries delivered. Yeah, I know, amazing. But that means it's time for...
Living your life and you're feeling low. You don't know what is true. You don't know what's true. So you quick flip through the channels to watch Sunny on The View. Oh my god, the stuff she says is dumb. Where the hell they get this woman from? She's a host who's always crass and lame, with lots of nonsense to proclaim.
It started with a grocery comment. No, seriously. On live television, Sunny Hostin looked straight into the camera and casually admitted she hadn't been to a supermarket in over 3 years. Why? Because she uses Instacart. And not just for grocery, she orders fire logs, bounty towels, the works. Then came the part where she insisted, out loud, that she gives a big tip because she knows the company doesn't pay their workers well. That one sentence said everything. She knew how out of touch it sounded, so she rushed to cover it with generosity, like saying, "Yeah, I don't go to stores anymore, but hey, I throw money at the problem."
Those hens are always clucking. They get to say stupid stuff for an hour every day, and then I get to say stupid stuff for an hour every day, except on purpose. But every now and then, one of those dingbats inadvertently says something that reveals modern liberal thought so perfectly it deserves further study. You know, like a weird serpent that washed up on the beach and you want to poke it with a stick.
And the moment she said it, the internet lit up. The audience cringed, the hosts smiled awkwardly, and behind the camera, you could almost hear the producers praying she'd stop talking. It wasn't just tone deaf, it was a perfect snapshot of privilege wrapped in good intentions. She meant to sound thoughtful, but all anyone heard was, "I'm too elite for shopping with regular people." By the way, before we continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and share more intriguing stories. Now let's continue. Because the real storm? It hadn't even started yet. The comment about grocery delivery was just the spark. What came next was a full-on unraveling. Live, unfiltered, and broadcast for millions to see.
So, Sunny, I bet you haven't been in a supermarket since COVID for about 3 years.
I haven't been in a supermarket since like COVID. For about 3 years. That's when I discovered Instacart, and I give them a big tip because they don't always pay their people well, and it's so that's been an issue I think for the company. But man, you can get toiletries, you can get fire logs. You know those big bounty towels you don't want to carry. Those from Costco. Somebody else goes.
Fire logs? She had to tell the audience that she tips big because even she knows she sounds insufferable. Hey, I'm an but at least I tip.
And then, boom, everything fell apart on live TV. Gutfeld, known for his sharp tongue and even sharper sarcasm, saw an opening and went straight for it. On a day when Sunny was already rambling about grocery deliveries and tipping ethics, Greg dropped a truth bomb so heavy it practically knocked the teleprompter offline. Mid-rant, the script actually glitched. But Sunny didn't need it anymore because her breakdown was happening in real time. He called her out not just for the supermarket thing, but for the non-stop hypocrisy she dishes out on The View. She talks about empathy, fairness, and treating people with kindness. But the moment someone disagrees, boom, label them a threat to democracy, a danger to society, a monster in disguise.
Hostin's obsession with race gets thrown back in her face. Today's video comes to us from Sunny Hostin. Sounds like a town. We're in Sunny Hostin. She was on PBS's Finding Your Roots, a show dedicated to researching celebrity ancestry. For context, Sunny is a staunch supporter of reparations and has made a fortune spewing nonsense about white privilege and racial justice. Well, turns out she's not as oppressed as she claims she is. She's actually the descendant of slave owners from Europe. Here's how she took the...
The studio tension was thick. You could see it in the way the other hosts froze. Nobody expected Greg to come that hard. And Sunny? She cracked not the usual eye roll and sigh routine. This was a real, uncomfortable unraveling. High definition, full color, awkward silence, stammering sentences kind of unraveling. Tissues might as well have started falling from the ceiling. She tried to bounce back with the same dramatic energy that The View thrives on, but it was too late. Greg had done either pulled the thread, and the whole polished image started to unravel. And this was just the beginning. Because what came out next changed everything people thought they knew about Sunny Hostin.
Wow. I'm a little bit in shock. I just always thought of myself as Puerto Rican, half Puerto Rican. I didn't think I was, my family was originally from Spain and slaveholders.
Yeah. So how are you feeling, my friend?
I think it's actually pretty interesting that my husband and I have shared roots.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate that. And I think it's great for our children to know this information. I guess it's a fact of life that this is how some people made their living, on the backs of others.
Fact of life. Interesting change of tune. For more, we go to our chief Sunny Hostin correspondent for a reaction.
Just when you thought it couldn't get more awkward, Bimout, comes the Ancestry twist that nobody saw coming. Turns out, Sunny Hostin had been a guest on Finding Your Roots, that PBS show where celebrities trace their family history. Now, remember, this is the same Sunny who built her public persona around fighting for reparations, speaking out on white privilege, and constantly reminding viewers about historical injustice. Her whole brand screams oppressed but empowered. But here's the twist. She's actually descended from European slave owners. Yeah. While she was busy lecturing America on generational guilt and inequality, her own ancestors were literally the ones running the plantations. You could see it on her face shock, embarrassment, and then that media-trained pivot into something she hoped sounded wise. "I guess it's just a fact of life," she said, eyes wide, trying to turn it into a teachable moment. Then she added something about how it's nice that her kids now share roots with her husband's side. But the damage was already done. No spin could clean it up. The woman who preached non-stop about justice and reparations had just learned her ancestors were the ones who owed it.
Oh, I'm gonna milk this till the end of time. You're right, anytime she says something stupid, I'm gonna go, slave owner! Kat, I just watched that. That's the second time I've watched that. She was tipped off beforehand, right? Because they had to tell her before, so she had time to regroup. They wouldn't just surprise. Really? You think? No?
I don't know. I feel like she could have maybe done better. Okay.
And that contradiction? It wasn't just ironic, it was explosive. It made everyone ask, if you're going to demand justice, shouldn't you start with your own house? And more importantly, how do you keep preaching when your entire message just collapsed under the weight of your own family history? So the next day on The View, things kicked off like they always do, with loud affirmations, dramatic head nods, and everyone pretending they're saving democracy with coffee in hand. But this time, Sunny was front and center. She tried to act like nothing happened, like she hadn't just found out her great-great-grandpappy was a slave owner, but the vibe was off. Everyone could feel it. And then she started talking again. That same overconfident tone, delivering opinions like she's reading from a script labeled, "How to Sound Profound in 5 Steps or Less." She played the legal expert, the moral compass, the voice of reason. But her words hit different now. Because while she told the audience that everything bad is someone else's fault, she was literally walking around with the weight of her own family's history on her shoulders. And here's the kicker: she kept acting like none of it mattered, like it was just another day on The View. She didn't pause. She didn't reflect. She just powered through it, as if the truth from yesterday hadn't even happened. Even her attempt to look composed came across like a performance. She said she was in shock and didn't know her family was from Spain. But that wasn't the issue. The real issue was this. For years, she pushed a one-sided narrative, and now, live on national TV, the other side of that story had slapped her right in the face. And instead of facing it, she buried it in cheerful banter and recycled talking points. But not everyone was buying the act anymore. And that's when things really started to boil. While Sunny tried to carry on like usual, people were already digging into the clip from Finding Your Roots. The headlines started to shift. No more applause for truth to power speeches. Now the internet was asking questions. How could someone preach so hard about racial justice, white guilt, and systemic privilege, while secretly being a descendant of slave owners? And better yet, how could she not know? Then came the real kicker. During the show, she tried to brush it off by saying it was great for the children to know their roots. But her tone was shaky. She wasn't in control. For someone who normally steamrolls her co-hosts with confidence, she now looked like someone carefully choosing her words to avoid stepping into another PR disaster. She said it was just how some people made their living a cold, passive way to talk about one of history's darkest chapters. It sounded less like reflection and more like deflection. And the audience? Silent. No applause, no cheers, just awkward tension you could cut with a butter knife. This wasn't just a slip. This was a collapse of her entire credibility on one of the very topics she made her name talking about. Her past had been turned into national news, and instead of owning it, she tried to spin it like a history class project. But viewers weren't buying it. And Greg? He was just getting warmed up. Greg Gutfeld wasn't done, not even close. He saw the cracks in Sunny's image, and instead of backing off, he went straight for the jugular. On his own show, he tore into the situation like a late-night roast, except this time, the target wasn't just Sunny's ancestry, it was everything she'd ever said on The View. He called her out for flipping the outrage switch only when it suits her. If a conservative makes a mistake, she wants investigations, accountability, public shame. But when her favorite political side does the same thing or worse suddenly, it's a complex issue with nuanced context. Greg laid it all out. Her double standards, her mood swings disguised as moral positions. He even compared her meltdown to a deck chair in a hurricane. Brutal? Yes. But effective? Absolutely. And while Sunny tried to turn every debate into a dramatic courtroom scene, Greg turned her contradictions into a comedy sketch highlighting how one week she slams border policies as inhumane, and the next she defends them because a Democrat is in charge. He wasn't just criticizing, he was holding up receipts, dates, direct quotes. It wasn't opinion, it was documentation. People who watched felt like someone had finally said what everyone was thinking but too afraid to say. That maybe, just maybe, Sunny's moral outrage wasn't about principle. Maybe it was all about control. Control of the conversation, control of the narrative. And that control? It was slipping fast. And just when it seemed like it couldn't get more personal, Greg took it there. He pulled up one of Sunny's more controversial takes, where she claimed that white women, especially the married ones, support the patriarchy just to protect their husbands, their sons, and themselves. According to her, they fall in line with whatever benefits their family the most. It was a sweeping, offensive generalization, and Greg wasn't about to let it slide. He flipped that comment right back on her, saying, "Where does Sunny really get her opinions from?" Because based on what people were seeing, it looked like her husband might be the one shaping her views. The irony? Thick. The feminist firebrand suggesting women are controlled by men while acting like she's just reading a script approved at home. And the outrage? Completely selective. If a conservative sneezes in the wrong direction, Sunny calls it a threat to democracy. But if a liberal stumbles over the Constitution, she shrugs and calls it complicated. She'll demand public hearings over a tweet but will defend politicians caught up in scandals that can't even fit into a single news cycle. Greg showed how her outrage worked like a light switch, always on for Republicans, mysteriously off for Democrats. The audience at The View might have kept clapping, but people watching at home, they were starting to see the pattern. It wasn't just about being passionate, it was about protecting a very one-sided story, and that story was falling apart. Back at The View, the studio audience kept doing what they always do, clapping on cue, booing when told, acting like gatekeepers of truth. But this time, Greg wasn't just speaking to them. He was speaking to everyone watching from home, tired of seeing the same one-sided outrage parade disguised as a talk show. And Sunny? She did what every modern TV personality has been trained to do. She played the victim, instantly, right on time. With a trembling voice and perfectly timed tears, she twisted Greg's criticism into a personal attack not just on her, but on women, minorities, and why not throw in puppies too? It wasn't about accountability anymore. Now it was about pain. Her pain, her struggle, her truth. It was a classic move. When the facts turn against you, don't argue. Expand the battlefield, make the whole thing about identity, emotion, and moral high ground. Say you're being silenced. Say it's hate. Say it's bullying. And to sell it harder, she dipped back into her Halloween blackface story, something that had nothing to do with the current situation, but she brought it up anyway. As if every personal struggle, real or imagined, could somehow erase the contradictions sitting right in front of everyone's eyes. Because when you can't explain the hypocrisy, you don't explain it. You drown it in drama. And that's exactly what she did. But behind all the theatrics, people were starting to connect the dots. And of course, right on schedule, Joy Behar was nowhere to be found. It was a Monday, her usual day off, but the timing couldn't have been more suspicious. The moment Greg Gutfeld showed up ready to call out Sunny's entire record, Joy's loudest defender of The View's groupthink was conveniently missing. Maybe she was avoiding the drama, or maybe she just didn't want to be in the splash zone when the truth started flying. But her absence didn't stop the jokes. One of the panelists quipped that every time Joy skips work, it's like one of her aunts dies a dry jab at how she always has a reason to vanish when things get uncomfortable. Someone else joked that Mondays are her pasture days, like she was off grazing peacefully while the show imploded without her. And let's be honest, she probably was watching from a distance with a smug little grin, thinking, "Yep, glad I sat this one out." Because it wasn't just a bad segment. It was a disaster, and it left Sunny sitting on that stage, holding back tears while trying to hold onto the spotlight. The woman who'd spent years launching fiery takes from the safety of a friendly couch was now cornered, exposed, and left to clean up her own contradictions without her usual backup. For once, she was on her own, and the cameras didn't miss a second of it. The meltdown wasn't just happening on screen, it exploded across the internet. Within minutes of the episode airing, social media lit up. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram platform flooded with memes, reaction clips, and savage captions. One of the most brutal showed Sunny mid-tears on The View with the words, "Strong opinions, weak spine." Another had her face overlaid with, "When you realize receipts don't lie." It wasn't just the usual political junkies piling on this, hit a nerve with everyone. Even people who normally avoided political drama were suddenly paying attention. Because there's something universal about watching someone who constantly lectures others finally get held to their own standard. Greg's segment? Viral. His breakdown of Sunny's contradictions hit a chord with viewers fed up with the polished fakery of daytime talk shows. People were tired of hearing the same tired outrage from the same 5 people pretending to represent an entire country. Greg didn't just make a few jokes, pulled the curtain back on a show that's been selling emotional politics disguised as public debate, and people loved it. The sarcasm, the honesty, the refusal to let her hide behind buzzwords and pity plays. And meanwhile, Sunny's fans were trying to reframe the whole disaster, but it was too late. The clips were everywhere, the hashtags were trending, and the carefully protected bubble around The View, it had finally popped. As the dust kept swirling around The View, the next few days turned into a full-blown PR circus. Sunny wasn't just reacting, she was performing. Carefully staged interviews, social media statements full of poetic sadness, and emotional retellings of how hard it is to be a woman of color in media. She brought out every talking point like she was reading off a crisis management checklist. But viewers weren't feeling it. People had seen the receipts. They remembered the old clips. The endless lectures, the finger-pointing, the condescending tone she used any time someone disagreed with her. They remembered the moments where she dismissed other people's lived experiences if they didn't align with her worldview. Suddenly, all that truth to power talk was looking more like talk down to people from a pedestal. And that's when something even more interesting happened. Clips of Greg Gutfeld's segment kept circulating, not just in conservative circles, but in mainstream pop culture accounts. Even comedy channels that normally stayed neutral jumped in, mocking The View as a parody of what political discussion used to be. Greg had compared the show to a live-action Tumblr thread and, honestly, that's exactly how it looked. Emotional takes, little to no facts, and total rejection of anyone who questioned the groupthink. Meanwhile, a deeper conversation began among viewers. People started asking, why do we let certain media voices avoid accountability just because they cry on camera or use identity as a shield? Shouldn't all public figures be held to the same standard, especially those who claim moral authority over others? And Sunny? She kept going. On another episode of The View, she gave a teary-eyed speech about how this kind of attack happens too often to women who speak their truth. She didn't mention the Ancestry reveal. She didn't acknowledge the contradiction. She didn't address the hypocrisy. Instead, she made it about being silenced, which was especially ironic, considering The View gives her a national platform 5 days a week to say whatever she wants, completely unchallenged. The show's co-hosts circled the wagons, of course. Whoopi gave her a big on-air hug. The audience clapped like they were at a revival service, and it was back to normal on the surface. But something had changed. There was a crack in the armor now. The carefully managed illusion of untouchable authority had been pierced. Viewers had seen behind the curtain, and what they saw wasn't strong leadership. It was someone who'd spent years throwing stones from inside a glass mansion, and now, with the spotlight turned back on her, she was trying to hide under the very rug she'd yanked out from under others. In that rug, it wasn't big enough to cover the mess. The fallout didn't stop with memes. The entire brand of The View started to wobble. Producers scrambled behind the scenes, trying to reframe what had just happened. This wasn't about Sunny getting exposono. They spun it into something nobler. Suddenly, the story wasn't Hostin caught in hypocrisy. It was strong woman under attack. They rushed to paint her as the target of hate, sexism, racism, take your pick. And with that, the narrative flipped. Pointing out contradictions? Now it was labeled as bullying. Holding public figures accountable? Called misogyny. Greg's segment was no longer a critique, it was recast as a dangerous attack on marginalized voices. They didn't just defend Sunny, they turned her into a martyr, a brave woman standing up to cruelty. Even though she'd spent years dishing out her own brand of televised judgment without ever being seriously challenged. But people weren't buying it anymore. Because it was too obvious. The show wasn't a debate, it was a bubble. The View had become a daily therapy circle dressed up as journalism. A place where uncomfortable facts were pushed aside for emotional validation, where clapping replaced thinking. And anyone who dared break that rhythm like Greg booed, shamed, and painted as the villain. The illusion of truth and balance was gone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Also, drop your thoughts in the comments. See you on the next one.